And welcome into the State of Purple in the State of Purple podcast. He's Jack Day. I'm Aj Mansour, and we are brought to you today by our friends at SodaStick and sodastick.com. Head over to sodastick.com right now. You can pick out some of your favorite Minnesota sports inspired goods, hats, t-shirts, serveware, posters, whatever it might be, and use that promo code KFAN when you check out. You'll get 15% off your order. That's SodaStick and sodastick.com. Jack Day, Minnesota Vikings, were sitting at 2-1. We didn't think we were going to be there, but they did defeat the Detroit Lions 28-24. How do you take that one in? And do you have any hair left on your head, or do you pull it all out?
It was stressful for sure. I think my main question, I had a huge question coming into the show for you since you were at the stadium. Did you see any paper airplanes throughout the course of that game?
Man, that's a great question. I don't think I saw any paper airplanes, and that's a good thing for those who aren't following. That means that the fans are engaged. They're still in the building. That helps. But yeah, no, I mean it was enough of an ebb and flow in this game, right? You find yourself down 14 points in the first half. You think that, oh my gosh, these Lions might be for real. Oh my goodness, maybe we're not for real. And you start to get worried there. And then very quickly, the Vikings fight their way back, end up tying it 14-14 heading into halftime. And then the wheels fall off again. You find yourself down 10 points again, heading into the final frame. And then you inch your way back. You start fighting your way back in. You get that touchdown. Adam Thielen had one. Dalvin Cook had one. I'm trying to think. Who was the third one? I'm blanking.
Osborne. At the end.
Osborne again. Yes, that's correct. So you have those opportunities, and then you get the one back-to-back 28-yard passes to KJ Osborne, wide open across the middle. It wasn't actually wide open. It was an interesting little kind of comeback, but for 28 yards to get the Vikings within field goal position again to potentially tie the game, and they go for the jugular, and they end up winning the game 28-24, and the Lions are still the Lions. What do you feel coming out of this game more, Jack? Are the Lions still the Lions? Did we maybe give them too much credit too early? Are the Vikings maybe using this as a turning point, or is this division just completely up in the air this year?
I think this has to be a turning point for the Vikings moving forward. And I say that because if we rewind time and go back in time just a year ago, it felt as if the Vikings were always the team on the other end of that. It was always, right. I was looking at the ESPN thing before, kind of seeing what the projection or whatever the percentile was, their chance of winning. I think it got close to 90% for Detroit. I don't know how many games the Vikings had like a 95 to 98% chance of winning last year that they ended up losing, actually. So being at the stadium, obviously you could hear it on TV as well. The Boo Birds were out. I think that was warranted because the offense was stalling. The defense looked very similar early on to what we saw in Philadelphia, where essentially it didn't matter what receiver it was. We've heard all this hype about Amon-Ra St. Brown, and rightfully so. I think he's going to be a stud in this league for a very long time, but he was banged up, and at one point it just seemed like the same thing. Whoever you wanted to run those midfield crossers that Philadelphia was gashing them with, it was the same thing. And I think that needs to get cleaned up. But having said all of that, I think it's pretty obvious. Everyone was talking about it. Kirk Cousins, Kevin O'Connell in their press conferences after the game. There were a lot of negatives in that game that they can learn from. And they're still sitting at 2-1, which I think you and I both would have taken that if you would have looked at the first three games of the schedule and said the Vikings start the season out 2-1. But I do want to say this because Kirk Cousins, it wasn't a good game for him. We saw one of his worst performances against Philadelphia a week ago, and he kind of was flat again. It seemed like he was timid with some pressures, but at the end of the game, when the game was on the line, he came through and made a couple nice throws and ended up putting the Vikings on the other side of that spectrum. I think I wasn't expecting them to win, and I think it was cool too that O'Connell was going for the jugular. It was a nice – I was joking about how – I was saying this throughout the game. I was like, well, at least the players aren't going to get yelled at too badly after the game if they lose because the culture is changing. And then, of course, they won. I almost tweeted something out. Didn't, thankfully, because I probably would have gotten ripped afterwards if I did tweet it out. But I think we're starting to see what Kevin O'Connell is building. The players are clearly bought in. I don't know if you saw it. I'm starting to really enjoy the not the press conferences, but the more unfiltered locker room speeches that they're allowed to record with Kevin O'Connell saying the F word quite a few times. He was fired up, but it's good to see that. And like I said, going for the jugular at the end of the game instead of, well, I guess, what was the score? It would have been 21-24. So they could have kicked a field goal and played for overtime.
Right.
They didn't want to do that. And I think 85-90% of the fan base would probably agree with that decision. You had the time to go out and score a touchdown. And at this point, I think we got to start calling KJ Osborne just Mr. Reliable, because he did that against Carolina last year. There's a lot of huge third down catches. I think he had like 600 receiving yards last year, but I do want to say kind of one final thing about the offense in general. It's amazing how when you start to spread the ball around and don't focus on just your one superstar, what the offense looks like. We were talking about that in the pregame show. We have to get Adam Thielen, KJ Osborne, Delvin Cook. Those guys have to get into a rhythm, and they did, and that was when the offense started clicking.
And hopefully this can be a launching point for Kirk Cousins. I don't know necessarily whether that was. It was certainly the game plan, but I don't know that that was what Kirk came to the table with, because it kind of started off into this ugly portion of the game. Justin Jefferson couldn't get open, couldn't get off the line. The Lions were pressuring them, very physical cornerbacks. They started getting flagged for that a bit in the second half, but in the first half, they would jam them at the line, to some extent knock them over, and then kind of keep grabbing them as they ran the rest of their routes, and they couldn't get open. And Justin Jefferson finished the game for 3 receptions for 14 yards. Okay, that typically would not spell victory for the Minnesota Vikings, but what I hope is that this boosts Kirk Cousins' confidence. Not necessarily his confidence as a quarterback, but his confidence and the other weapons on this offense. The Dalvin Cooks, 97 yards before his injury. Alexander Mattison, who did have that third touchdown and 27 yards of his own, 28 yards, excuse me. And then you look at Adam Thielen, who got 6 catches for 61 yards. Irv Smith, 2 for 32. Ellefson, 2 for 24. Johnny Munt, 2 for 23. And your leading wide receiver, KJ Osborne, 8 targets, 5 receptions, 73 yards, and the game-winning touchdown. Those final couple plays, Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson were bracketed in double coverage. They were not going to let Justin Jefferson beat them. They knew that the Vikings had to pass the ball. They weren't going to let them do it. They doubled up on Adam Thielen as well. And what that did is it left KJ Osborne in one-on-one coverage, which I don't even know if you could call it that, wide open coverage for that game-winning touchdown. I hope that this boosts Kirk into the rest of the season with more confidence in all of his weapons, because ultimately that'll spread the ball around. It'll keep this offense moving even when Justin is having a down day. But they're going to have to start respecting KJ Osborne. They're going to have to start respecting whichever tight end du jour it might be in there. And what that's going to do is get one-on-one single coverage for Thielen and one-on-one single coverage for Jefferson. And they'll be able to get involved in the game. So I believe that this could be keyword could be a launching point for the season, much like in 2008, 2009, when Brett Favre came in that Week 3 San Francisco game. If you remember that Week 3 game, the first couple of weeks, Brett Favre comes in, they can't quite gel on offense. It just didn't feel right. And then Week 3 comes through. They get that comeback victory over the San Francisco 49ers. Greg Lewis in the back of the end zone. Oh, my heavens. PA goes crazy. The Metrodome at the time goes nuts. And it kind of propelled the Vikings through the rest of the season. This could be one of those launching points that they can now stack this on an international game against the Saints, a win hopefully against a division rival in the Chicago Bears, and you roll into a good Miami game on the road right before your bye with momentum and hopefully clicking on all cylinders.
Yeah, like I said, I agree with you. I think using the word could is a good way to put it. It could be a turning point for this team, but
you can't do it with this guy.
You can't commit to the Vikings long term with too high of hopes. But I want to go back on something that you were talking about there, and just spreading the ball around. We've always talked about, yes, Kirk Cousins needs to do a better job about spreading the ball, and haven't always talked about. This year, we've been talking about how we need to spread the ball around better. It wasn't just these superstar playmakers, the wide receivers and the running backs of the world. CJ Ham had a super nice jump cut to get a first down. And I believe, I was looking at the box score earlier, I think all 3 of the tight ends actually had 2 catches as well. Even Ben Ellefson, who's more of a blocking tight end. So if you can get those guys involved a little bit more, I think it's just going to push this offense that much further. I do want to say, I hope there's a little point of emphasis this week with all of those players, tight ends, wide receivers, running backs, please put them all in front of a jugs machine for a couple hours, because the drops, it was weird. And I don't know if you can necessarily credit Justin Jefferson with, I think there was 2 of them. And maybe I have too high of expectations because he has that stardom level already, but there's just been some drops this year that are, I'd say, uncharacteristic. And again, they're not easy balls to catch, but we're so used to seeing both Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen come down with those plays. But I'm not concerned about the game that Justin Jefferson had. I don't know if there's people out there that are. I think he's going to eventually have the 150-yard receiving games with a couple touchdowns down the road. But if you can just get the defenses to key in on other aspects of the game, they're not going to be able to double cover Justin Jefferson every single game, every single snap of every game. And if they do decide to do that, the Vikings proved yesterday they have weapons elsewhere that they can look to, and I think they can help this offense essentially take the top off and become that high explosive offense that we're expecting to see out of Kevin O'Connell.
All right, let's rewind a little bit here. We've talked about how the game ended. We've talked about the positives and what we liked on that last part there. The Vikings did get up 14. I'm sorry, were down 14. They fought their way back. They then were down 10 and fought their way back again. This is far from a complete, far from a polished, perfect team right now. There are some concerns on defense. What did you pull out of this game that kind of left you concerned heading into, not specifically, week 4 with the Saints, but the rest of the season, that they need to figure out if they're going to continue winning games?
Yeah, there's a couple, I think, and I know I think Josh Metellus played well. I know he had the drop. He could have sealed the game a little bit earlier and made that stadium feel a little bit better, but I think he played solid, and I'm saying that because I didn't really notice him messing up anywhere. But a couple things that irked me a little bit. If you go back in time when the Vikings beat the Detroit Lions, more often than not, and this is just I haven't looked up stats on this, but I just have a gut feeling that more often than not, they got, whether it was Matthew Stafford or Jared Goff, they were sacking him. They would get them down 3 to 4 times, maybe even more. 0 sacks in this game.
Well, Jared Allen chased Dan Orlovsky out of the back of the end zone once for a safety.
Did you see that he, I don't know what Jimmy Garoppolo did that last night. I don't know
he did. You're right. Yeah, you're right. Yep.
He tweeted and he said that he was free. I thought that was pretty funny. Yeah. But no pressure with the front 4 that the Vikings have now with Za'Darius Smith and Danielle Hunter. I shouldn't say no pressure, no sacks. Both Za'Darius Smith and Danielle Hunter were in the top 5 in terms of PFF grades on the defensive side of the ball. So PFF clearly liked what they saw. They were getting pressures. I know Za'Darius Smith had a couple stops behind the line of scrimmage, but Jared Goff is one of the least mobile quarterbacks I'd say that the Vikings are going to face. And we saw it last week with Jalen Hurts. If you can't get that quarterback on the ground, they're going to hurt this defense, because I don't think that the secondary is this kind of goes into the next aspect of what I'm concerned about on the defensive side. The secondary isn't good enough to cover long periods of time. I think we're starting to see teams attack the Vikings in a way that the Vikings were attacking the Packers in week 1, where they were getting their playmakers out in space with doing these deep crossers. And it's killed the Vikings defense the last couple of weeks. I don't know if you have this stat up in front of you, but I keep forgetting to bring it up. There was something that they put up on the TV, and maybe they had it up at the stadium as well. I think this was like the first time that the Vikings have been down 10 plus points 2 different times in the game and come out ahead since, like, I think it was 1979 they did it last against the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, something in the 70s, yeah.
That's crazy to me, because Kirk Cousins is the quarterback, and I didn't know he could lead game-winning drives. So it was cool seeing him get to that point. But yeah, going back to the defense, I think just the disconnect between the lack of sacks along with on the back end. I mean, we've seen Patrick Peterson make a couple nice plays. We've seen Patrick Peterson get fooled a couple times. Cam Dancer has been really good in run support and tackling, but again, I haven't seen
Cam Dantzler had a rough game,
Yeah.
specifically first half yesterday.
I was
Getting picked out like crazy.
I was a little bit surprised we didn't see a Caleb Evans because
Right.
they threw him out there in Philadelphia, and I was kind of
Well, and
expecting.
even the tackling, you mentioned that he was doing a decent job tackling. He also was getting juked out of his jock. I
Yeah.
mean, there was a time or two where it was just very blatantly Cam Dance, and off the last game and the misstep that he had towards the end there, you start this game like that, and it kind of felt like it was going to go bad, and maybe you would see a substitution, but he might have pulled it together because that didn't happen.
And I do want to say too, Jordan Hicks has been a pleasant surprise for me. That guy, he's all over the field,
Right.
and he's leading the team in tackles, I believe. At least it seems like he's every box score he's led the team in tackles through the first 3 games. But wasn't expecting that. I think we have a good linebacker duo, and I think the pressures and the sacks are going to come with the front that they have. But and I should give credit to Detroit's offensive line too, because it's a very, very good offensive line that Detroit has kind of built over the years. And I think we can use that as a little bit of a segue to the Vikings offensive line. A little going back to the positive. I'm just positive today. I don't want to talk too much about the negatives, but Christian Darrisaw had like an 88 point something pass blocking grade and an 86 point something run blocking grade. He had 47, or I think I wrote that down, 47 pass blocking snaps yesterday and did not allow a pressure.
Yeah.
When was the last time we could say something positive about the offensive line? And it wasn't just him. The entire offensive line played well. And I think we've said that throughout the course of the show. The offensive line doesn't have to be a top 5 unit. Let's just see what this team can do with a above average, possibly offensive line. And I think you can see Kirk Cousins play a little bit better. I'd like to see him get a little bit more comfortable. I think we saw a little bit of the scaries back there, like we saw in Philadelphia, but he had time to throw. And at the end of the day, Justin Jefferson wasn't open because he was getting bracketed over the top, but he was able to kind of settle in the second half and find some of the other playmakers.
So this is this part of the show is not necessarily planned, but while you were going on there, I found a couple video clips. So for those who are watching on the stream, you're going to get this in full perspective, and we'll try and talk through this for the rest of the podcast listeners. But you have the opportunity for the All-22 to come out, and guys like our friends Will Raggets and Nick Nelson kind of dive into those and kind of highlight some of these things. And I saw recently that they highlighted 2 of the situations that you just talked about, Jack, specifically the defensive line. Danielle Hunter, this drive right here, I'm going to pull it up. I'll play it a couple times and we'll talk through it. This is a rush from Danielle Hunter on the left side there, and he gets past the tackle. He gets past him really quick. Little juke spin move to get to the quarterback, but it was a quick release. Jared Goff got rid of the ball, got it to the outside. So you have plays like that where your linemen are doing what they're supposed to do. They're putting pressure on the quarterback. They're rushing, pressuring, and hurrying up the play. But sometimes you just get the wrong play call, right? If that would have been a five-step drop, Jared would have been sacked. I mean, there was no stopping Danielle Hunter in that motion there. He got around the tackle, right to the quarterback. A lot of five-man fronts yesterday from the Minnesota Vikings with your 3 defensive linemen and then your outside linebackers in a stand-up position with Zadarius Smith and Danielle Hunter rushing the entire time. We saw that consistently yesterday, and I think that's going to be something we see into the future. When you look at the offensive line, this one right here is going to show both Christian Darrisaw and Brian O'Neill kind of taking their edge rushers for a ride around the outside, as Kirk Cousins steps up the middle. So you have the play right here on our screen where we're watching it, Darrisaw on the right and O'Neill on the left. Clearly that's flipped around for the quarterback, but you see the rush gets maybe a half step on both tackles, and they just push them. They just push them around the quarterback. Cousins steps up, avoids the pressure, gets the pass off, and it's what you're supposed to do. That's a win for your offensive line when you just take that guy around the outside and push him back there. That's how you have a quiet game, a relatively quote-unquote quiet game that gets you high PFF rankings, praise from the coaches on both the offensive and defensive line.
Yeah, and the Danielle Hunter one, that's impressive because that's against Penei Sewell, who was a first-round pick, top 10 pick, maybe top 5 pick. I don't remember when he went a year ago out of Oregon. But, yeah, the 2 tackles, both Brian O'Neill and Christian Darrisaw, it feels weird saying this, but it finally seems as if the Vikings have those 2 positions locked down for the long term. And in that clip as well that you just showed, they ran a stunt with arguably, I know he's a rookie, but I'm going to say he's if he's not their best pass rusher, he's going to be their best pass rusher. And I think is that Ezra right there and Delvin Cook threw a chip block on him as well. They run a little stunt inside and 0 sacks. We were talking about that on Sunday morning. Aiden Hutchinson sacked Carson Wentz 3 times when they played Washington. And I do want to give credit to Detroit. I don't think this is the same old Detroit Lions team. They just played a very tough game week 1 against Philly. They beat Washington and they played the Vikings on the road, very tough, and arguably probably. I think you can make the argument that the Lions probably should have won that game, but
for sure,
it feels good from a Vikings perspective that they're on the other end of it so far. Again, we're 3 games through the season. A lot can change between now and the end of the year, but the fact that they were able to put a late drive together, go for the jugular, and win that game, and then put it away with the defense. I mean, I think there was 45 seconds left for Detroit at the end of the game. That felt like 3-4 minutes after the season we saw last year at the Vikings. So it all worked out, and I think it's a huge win for this team, because if they would have been going to London 1-2 after a divisional loss that, like I said, you can make the argument that they got outplayed, but the good teams find ways to win games like that. And I'm not necessarily saying the Vikings are a good team yet because they have a lot to prove, but they won the game. They come out on top, and the last 5 minutes of the game were impressive. And at the end of the day, that was all that mattered.
Yeah, I don't want to swing too negative, right? A win is a win, you'll take it, but there is still room to grow, and I don't think anybody would argue that the defense is still hemorrhaging yards on the ground. There was an issue with drag routes across the middle, primarily on 4th down, which was unique in the sense that at one point in the game, the Lions were 0 for 3 on 3rd down and 3 for 3 on 4th down. That success continued through most of the game. Obviously, in the second half, I think there were 2 big 4th down stops. The first ones, maybe the only ones that the Lions were able to the Vikings were able to stop them on 4th down. The big one towards the end that gave the Vikings good field position, yada, yada. We know the rest of the history there. I heard Ben Lieber today on the Power Trip talking about the drag routes across the middle. Why was the middle so wide open? DJ Chark, everyone forgot that DJ Chark was even in the league. Craig Reynolds, one of the most plain names in all of NFL, was their leading wide receiver with something like 96 yards and a bazillion catches. And most of those were across the middle, 3rd downs, 4th downs, key situations. Lieber was talking today with the Power Trip about how the linebackers in this defense, at least right now, the linebackers are responsible for pass coverage more often than they have been in the past. I don't know if that's going to stay this way, if that's just part of this defense, or if it's what the other teams have been throwing at them. But you have Hicks and Kendricks across the middle who are being targeted right now, to be honest. I mean, they'll take a wide receiver across the middle, and the linebacker will go with them, and then they'll drag a wide receiver from the far side across into that vacated space right in the middle. And if that receiver has a step or two on that cornerback or safety, whoever's taking them at that point, you have the wide open field right in the middle. All you have to do is lead your receiver, you hit them, and you get chunk yardage. I mean, we're talking 10, 15 yards at a time, even more so for the Lions, especially in that first half. That's something that needs to be shored up. I don't know exactly how they're planning on doing it, what they need to do, but teams are going to see that. The Lions probably saw it a little bit from the Philly game because we saw it a bit there as well. But for sure, coming out of this game, teams are going to look at film and see that the wide open middle of this field, if you vacate that middle and pull those linebackers out, there's a lot of space there, a lot of green. You don't even have to settle in. All you got to do is drag a guy across, and you have that advantage. That is a concern, I think, for this team going forward.
Yeah, I agree. I do feel as if we know Eric Kendricks is a great coverage linebacker, but there's just been situations that he's been in throughout the first three games of this year where it just seems like he's just either a hand or a step away from being able to make the play. I know I think he had a couple nice plays yesterday. One where he tackled and was covering Amon-Ra St. Brown, which that's a huge mismatch. I know he dinged his ankle up throughout the course of the game, so it might have been a little bit more fair. But during a normal game, if they're both 100%, I don't want to see Kendricks on Amon-Ra St. Brown one-on-one. He had a nice pass breakup on TJ Hawkinson, the tight end, that's more of a matchup I'd be okay with seeing him there. I don't know how Jordan Hicks has been. I feel like Kendricks has been the one more
He
noticeable.
stands out.
Yeah, it's weird. And I think that's a good thing that he
Right.
doesn't stand out. But it just, like I said, it's been noticeable with Kendricks this year. We know how good he is in coverage. But I see what Lieber is saying. It almost seems like they're testing him a little bit more. And personally, I don't love that. I feel like I brought this up a couple times on the show. It was Kirk Cousins' first year in Minnesota. We went out to the Los Angeles when we were playing the Rams at the Coliseum, and Anthony Barr was put on Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods and had 2 touchdowns scored on him with those guys. And it's like, I could play quarterback and I would notice that if I'm calling the plays. Like I would see that Anthony Barr is covering one of the best route runners in the NFL and know it's a clear mismatch. And that's no shade to Anthony Barr by any means. I mean, there's not many linebackers that are going to be able to stick on Cooper Kupp in this league. So I agree with you. I think they're going to have to figure out a way to negate some of the targets across the middle, because it's been gashing this team, and it's been gashing them for what seems like a lot of yards. And it wasn't so much happening during the end of the game yesterday, but that first half, it was all they were running, and it seemed to be working every single time.
Right. So, but alas, the Vikings win. They are now sitting at 2-1, a much different feel from what we maybe thought it was going to be. It would have been pretty ugly, Jack, if they had gone to 1-2, if they had lost this game, not only to the Lions, but a divisional opponent. You have then you go on this long trip over the ocean. You're playing in London. It feels a heck of a lot different, right? I mean, this is it's easy to say that wins are better than losses, but I think this might be an opportunity. It could be a turning point for this team if they can build upon it. And they have an opportunity to do so against New Orleans. We won't spoil too much of that because we are going to get together later this week for a preview show, maybe get someone else on to chat with us as well about that situation. But lasting impressions. I'll go real quick. I think that the Lions are going to be a formidable foe into the future. I still don't think that they're there. I've heard this phrase thrown about, and I never really understood it until maybe yesterday. They have to learn how to win. Derek Carr said it last week. We've heard coaches say it all the time. They just need to learn how to win. They're talented enough to win. They have belief in the system. They're buying into Dan Campbell, but they need to learn how to win, or learn how to get out of their own way, maybe. And that goes from the coaching staff to the players all across the board. Yesterday it was the coaching staff kind of making some questionable decisions to kick that field goal at the end, to go for some of those 4th downs towards the end. In negative or even right at the midfield kind of field position. This team is going to be good, and they're going to be a formidable foe for the Vikings. A very young roster with talent. They just need to learn how to win.
Yeah, in taking that one step further, I thought Jared Goff, first half Jared Goff was fantastic. They made Jared Goff look like he was damn near Tom Brady yesterday in the first half, which, again, that points
They've
to
done
the
that
fact
before, though, right? I mean, I think the only perfect passer rating the Vikings have ever given up was Jared Goff.
Well, actually, he was the quarterback for the Rams in that 38-31 loss that game that I attended. But
that was the perfect passer rating. Yeah, that was it.
So yeah, I don't know. I agree with you. I do think Detroit is kind of here. It's not the same that it was a couple years ago when it was even Matthew Stafford and Calvin Johnson. They weren't able to somehow turn that team around. So I think they're bought in, and I think Dan Campbell's doing all the right things. I think they have a terrific coaching staff as well, not just Dan Campbell. It's Dan Campbell from the top down. They have a lot of good coaches in that building, and like you said, they are bought in. But that phrase that you just said, learning how to win, that I think you can flip the script, kind of going back to the Vikings over the last 2 years. It was very similar. They learned how to lose is what it felt like last year. It just felt like they were in control of the majority of the games that they played in, and they found a way to do what the Detroit Lions did yesterday and lose the game. And maybe this new regime, it feels like they're more even keeled than they've been in years past too, where like it's no panic. I wanted to bring this up because you were at the stadium. I saw a tweet somewhere that Kevin O'Connell sat down and had a long conversation with Justin Jefferson on the bench during the game. I didn't see that. I wanted to see if you saw that and if you could tell what the emotion levels were throughout that conversation.
Yeah, I didn't see that's particular conversation, but I can certainly confirm that the tone on the sidelines is more even keeled, right? I mean, you don't get too fired up. You don't sometimes even to a point where with a new head coach, you kind of look and wonder if they're swimming too much, if they're swimming in the deep end and not quite comfortable enough yet to do those things. But I think that's the personality, that's the vibe, that's Kirk Cousins kind of vibe. He doesn't get too fired up. You have that carries over to the coach now, and it trickles down. So I think that the sentiment of that situation, although I didn't see it, was probably pretty true. I mean, this is a team that isn't going to give up. They're not going to go, even if they were down 14, when they headed into the locker room at halftime, not going to give up, not going to have that opportunity. That doesn't mean they're going to come out and play better every single time, but the mental side of it is going to keep them in the game and at least keep them from continuing to spiral downward if they're able to stop it, right? And you saw that in that Philly game. They got down, they got their butts kicked in that first half and allowed 0 points in the second half. Doesn't mean they played perfect, doesn't mean they played well, doesn't mean clearly that they won, but they were able to compose themselves enough to go from allowing Philadelphia to have like the perfect offensive half to really not doing anything in the second half. So I think that's going to be something that we're going to see, where they're not going to feel like they're out of games, and they're not going to necessarily feel like they're too far ahead in games too. It's going to be an even keeled, kind of confident approach to each and every game. So I think that's a good thing.
Kirk did show a little bit of fire yesterday, along with probably 90% of the Vikings fan base that were watching at the end of that first half. That I don't know. I was sitting there and I thought it should have been a delay of game. I don't know if that's how it works per se, but
right.
You
so
can't
they
swat the ball.
They didn't show that replay on TV, did they?
They did actually at the start of the third, because
Okay.
Kirk was going kind of ballistic
Right.
on the sidelines, like yelling at the refs, and
So
rightfully so. They did show
in
to open up the third.
They showed it in stadium like
Sure, that
right
one
away.
over well.
Right away, yeah, right away during the halftime, and so there was this discussion about where some of us in stadium who saw it were talking about it. Ben Lieber came back from that first break. He was fired up about it. He saw it from the sidelines, and nobody at home was able to see it because they had cut frame. I mean, I think they went to a KJ Osborne cut right at the last second, right when it happened. But was it Charles Rogers? I think just knocked the ball out of Bradbury's hand, bobbled it around, and it ended up running the clock out for, probably they would have had 2 seconds. I mean, it wouldn't have been anything crazy, but they would have probably had some time to do. I forget, it was a very deep field goal, or was it one more offensive play?
I think it was a makeable field goal, and I say makeable, and I think it was going into the side of the stadium where apparently the wind was gusting like 80 miles an hour through those big doors at US Bank Stadium. But I don't know. That's another thing that we didn't talk about on the negative side was the kicking woes. But I don't know. I think in the NFL you should be expected to make 56-yard kicks, and I think it's too early to panic on Greg Joseph, and it did seem kind of weird. They were talking about that on air, if there's a slight breeze that's coming through those doors, because every single kick that went that direction, it sailed right. And it wasn't just Greg Joseph. The Lions kicker had one happen to him too. And
yeah,
I thought that was weird. And I remember like being in the stadium, like you can feel that breeze if you're down on like field level, but
for sure.
I've never noticed it to make that much of a difference in the kicking game.
Yeah, no, it was an interesting little aside to that game as well, that kicking situation. But hopefully, they're able to figure that out and carry that in. I don't know what the wind is like in London. I don't know how that works. So it'll be an interesting situation. But Jack, thanks for taking some time out of your day today. Minnesota Vikings 2-1. We like that better than 1-2. So we'll take it. However it came, we'll take it. And we will also say thank you to Soda Stick for presenting the State of Purple podcast and the State of Purple podcast live stream. Head over to sodastick.com right now, get your Minnesota sports inspired goods, and check out the promo code KFAN, 15% off your order at checkout. It's SodaStick and sodastick.com. Jack, we will talk to you later this week. We'll see maybe Wednesday, Thursday. We'll see how the schedule goes for the Vikings, as I don't think they're flying out till Thursday. So they're waiting later. They're kind of taking a different approach this time. The Saints might be flying out today, and the Vikings will be flying out later this week. So we'll see which one is the better situation. Hopefully Minnesota can figure it out. So for Jack Day, I'm Aj Mansour. This is the State of Purple podcast. We'll see you later.